Hello, my name is Gaëtan Klein and welcome to this presentation on how can big-state therapy help people with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism to regain a full emotional connection with other people, make friends more easily, and feel that they belong in the world. So my name is Gaëtan Klein, I am from France and I am a certified psychotherapist and researcher from the Institute for the Study of Peak States, which I will tell you more about later on. But most importantly, I used to suffer myself from feeling different, feeling that I was not connected with other people, that it was difficult to understand them and to be understood by people, and a lot of other typical symptoms of what is sometimes called, still nowadays, Asperger's syndrome. And that's why it's important for me to be able to give you this presentation, because things can change. So today I'm not going to tell you about the old ways that do not work, such as behavioral methods that train your child to behave in a certain way, but often creates more inner conflict. We don't want that to happen. We're not going to talk about social skills classes that teaches them what to do, but the problem with that is that it never becomes really natural because the underlying problem is still there. And of course, we won't talk about medication that mutes symptoms, but do not make your kid feel much better or more efficient in social skills. The problem with all these methods is that they often have a lack of respect and understanding of your child's unique way of being, its own unique talents and challenges, and these are management techniques. Okay, so they are designed to make problems easier to tolerate. They are supposed to manage the problem, but they do not solve the underlying reason why it is difficult for your child. So that's why we want to address and understand the underlying cause. So our way of thinking is that autism is not a disease or a flaw that has to be cured or corrected with training, but instead we need to provide children with love and understanding, and we need to give them this acceptance and this support so that they will be able to overcome their challenges. We're not trying to correct them or to fix them, but to help them and understand that everyone is unique, and we just have to understand their challenges and help them overcome it so that they can be free to be themselves, really. And the goal of this presentation especially is to understand the real root cause of those challenges, and to, if we understand correctly what we are facing, then we can provide a solution that is concrete, that is real, efficient, and allows for major change in the quality of life. So, all of those very common symptoms that we are going to talk about that are generally categorized under the label of Asperger's syndrome, or nowadays mostly high-functioning autism, you might recognize them from your experience or your children's experience. So it's hard to make friends. There's a feeling of misunderstanding and being rejected, some loneliness and social isolation. It's difficult to read body language and to understand social cues, and boredom intolerance, which is the intolerance to being bored and to be pretty agitated because of that. Anxiety can sometimes be a big part of these problems. And clumsiness is also related to this feeling that the space around you is restricted and it's hard to really make sense of that space, really. And it all comes down to the major symptoms, which are not being able to feel other people's emotion and living in a bubble. Now, all of that is linked to an experience that I call the wall of glass experience. And the wall of glass is what creates all of these consequences, all of these effects. But before I explain to you how it works, I wanted to show you some real-life examples of adults with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism. And I gathered some examples from the social networks of people telling how it is to live with it when they're grown-ups. So someone would say, "My life is falling apart. I am betrayed again, I am not okay, and I don't want to be here." Someone said, "I am my apparent worst enemy. I have so much of self-hatred in me. I do not like that I am ND." So ND means neurodivergent. I have no idea how I'm going to survive in this world. Even the freaks reject me. Autism is like having leprosy. Who doesn't want to get in a job at all because you'd rather be broke than to deal with people? Now, of course, that's a big problem because in life you have to deal with people all the time. And if you don't want to do it, then of course your life becomes much more restricted. Someone asked, does anyone else feel like an outcast? And you can see that there were 95 answers to that. Most of them are yes, always. I've never felt that I belong in this universe. I felt like an outcast since I was a child, just 99% of the time. All the time, yes. Who here doesn't? All the time, absolutely, and so on. And this message really struck with me. Someone said, I need to be able to say that I hate being alive because of all the misery that Asperger's has caused me. While everyone else around me has happy lives, I have to be miserable at 26 with not a single year of happiness since I was 12 because of the way society has abused me, rejected me, and abandoned me. Nobody ever helped me with it when I was growing up. Instead, my father ridiculed me. I haven't had a girlfriend in 5 years because everyone who gets to know me sees that I have this disease and runs away. I wish I got a cancer diagnosis instead of a Asperger diagnosis because I regret my entire adult life and just want to be happy like others, but I'm not allowed to be. So that's really painful. Now, there are some other examples. Maybe I shouldn't read them all, but very often people who have autism, who are on the spectrum, have all these difficulties and they try to overcome them, but they never really feel that they belong, that the people understand them, and it's a lot of struggles. So this has a huge negative impact when you have this problem on your ability to socialize and to feel that you're part of the world, and also to deal with people, which is what we have to do in life. And like any handicap, it can be overcome. Okay, so don't get me wrong, this is not a life sentence. You can overcome it. There's a lot of people with Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism who are happy and they have good relationships. But for the majority, it's a struggle. It's more difficult, and some people never really get over it. And the worst part might be to not understand why it happens, and as a consequence, to reject yourself or to reject other people. So, I'm here to tell you that most of these problems, the root cause of them is the feeling of being surrounded by a wall of glass. And that wall of glass blocks the ability to feel other people's emotions. So what is this wall of glass, and why is it the source of all these symptoms we talked about? Well, it is something that you cannot touch, you cannot see it, but when you have it, somehow you know that it's there. And you know that it's preventing you from feeling what's outside and connecting with people. And that's why I call it the wall of glass. Sometimes I call it the invisible barrier, because it is invisible, you cannot really touch it, but somehow it feels like there is a separation between you and the outside world. So the term wall of glass kind of describes it. And what it creates is two things. First, it creates a disruption in the feeling of space, meaning that you feel like there is a strange thing happening in the space around you, and you cannot really feel outside of this wall of glass. It's really like a barrier. And it enables people to feel other people's emotions. So the result is that it creates all of these different symptoms and effects. And it depends from one person to another, that will be different. Some people cope with it in different ways, but it can create clumsiness or the impression of being in a bubble. And generally you like being in your bubble because you feel fine inside your bubble. But it's a problem in relationships. Boredom, inattentiveness is something that is very often labeled as ADD. But what happens is when you are inside this wall of glass, the topics that interest you and things that really matters to you, you can focus on them. You can focus. But some things don't interest you at all, and if other people try to impose on you their topics of interest, you get bored. And that's why I see a lot of kids in school get inattentive. It's not because they cannot focus, it's because they're bored, they're really bored. And very often we accuse people with Asperger's syndrome of having no empathy. Well, we're going to talk about it more, but that's actually because they cannot really feel what's outside this wall of glass. It's not because they lack a sense of compassion or interest in people. Generally, it's the opposite. They're very compassionate and we want to be with people. But there is this difficulty of understanding people's emotions that creates this disconnect. And obviously, all these difficulties in relationship and social interactions come from that. And it can create feelings of anxiety or feeling alienated and feeling different, restricted interest, so to speak. But mostly, you misunderstand people and what motivates them, what they expect from you, how to behave. All of this is much more complicated when you have this wall of glass. And as a result, you can feel isolated or masking, which is the fact of pretending to be in a certain way because you have things that people expect you to be in that way, so you're not really yourself, but at the same time, it doesn't feel comfortable, and a lot of frustration. All of that comes from this feeling of having a wall of glass. So why is that? How does that work exactly? Well, especially if we focus on Asperger's syndrome issues, social interaction issues. Well, if you think about it, the first thing we do as a human being when we are born is we observe what's going on around us. And babies look at people and hear people and try to understand what's going on. So when we are a baby, we look at people's faces. And people communicate with baby by making faces, by doing some sounds, and they're trying to express with that language, but they try to communicate with the baby. And when you are a baby, you try to understand by feeling what's going on and associating people's body language, their face, their sounds with what they're feeling to understand if you're safe or not, what's going on, etc. And this is the first form of human communication that we learn. Okay, it's not based on language and words, it's based on body language. And actually, 90% of human communication is non-verbal communication or paraverbal communication. And that's what we learn when we are babies. That's the first thing we learn. But when there is this wall of glass, this barrier that prevents us from feeling outside, we are unable to understand this language and we are unable to learn correctly this language. So it's much more difficult to recognize facial expressions and their meaning, and because you don't feel it, okay? And as a result, all of this paraverbal, non-verbal communication might elude you, and that remains later on in life. So second degree, jokes, subtle nuances of communication, indirect meanings, all of that can be confusing if you have this wall of glass because you don't have that first connection of other people's emotion and the meaning of what they're trying to communicate. So that's a big problem. And here are some phrases, some sentences that I recognize I've been saying to my parents when I was a kid and that other people tell me all the time, because it's very difficult to explain to people what is our experience. We try to say it, but we don't really have the words of, oh, there's a wall of glass in front of me, or, oh, I cannot feel other people's emotions, because we're born with it. So what we perceive is just what we perceive, and for us it's normal. We don't recognize, oh, I'm not feeling other people's emotion. No, we just recognize, there is something going on between me and the world that seems wrong. And generally we try to explain it with those sentences. Some things like, life is happening outside of me. Or I am just a spectator. I am watching life happening on stage, on a scene, but I'm not on the stage. And the words that I hear again and again and again is, I am different from others. I am different, I am different. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know what to say about it, but I am different. Or others don't understand me, I don't understand them. I am looking at life through a glass. There is an impassable barrier between me and people, or I am living in a bubble. So maybe you recognize that your child has been telling you some of these things. And people who have this wall of glass often try to understand other people's emotions and behavior with their head, with their intellect. We try to make sense of how it works and how do we socialize and how do we behave with people. But we don't have this thing that for other people is natural, this intuitive, direct understanding. So trying to figure out things with our head works more or less, but it's never truly satisfying and efficient. And that's why other people generally accuse us of being weird, of being cold or arrogant, and we receive all this negative feedback and we don't understand why, because we're trying to do our best to, make friends, behave, and be well with people. So it can be really hurtful to hear this, but probably your child has been hearing things like, you are weird, you're a Miss Know-it-all, you are cold, you are condescending, you are complicated, you are not present, you are in your bubble, you're asocial, and other very sympathetic words, yes, such as you're an alien or stop behaving like an autistic. Always very nice to hear, isn't it? But one of the worst things that I heard and that other people have been telling me they've been hearing was, you have no compassion or you have no empathy. And that's really hard because all we're trying to do is to have empathy and to connect with people and to understand, and we want this connection to happen, but it's not our fault why it's not happening, and we don't understand why we've been accused of having no empathy. It doesn't make sense and it's hurtful. So all of these problems come from this wall of glass, because this wall of glass prevents us from intuitively understanding the adjustments in communications that are needed in different contexts and with different people. So we're trying to make sense of human communication with rules, but rules are so, they need to be adjusted all the time, and it's difficult for us to do it. And it's hard to hear that we don't have empathy because we try to have empathy. And what it creates really is a disconnect between us and the world, and this confusion and this misunderstanding. So here are two other characteristics of this wall of glass. Maybe you recognize that in yourself or in your child. The first one is the feeling of never being really included in groups. And groups make us feel uneasy. And sometimes, even if we physically are in a group, we don't feel that we really are integrated and part of the group, and we try to interact and to intervene, but somehow it's uneasy or difficult. And so when we have that problem, we generally prefer one-on-one interaction because it's much easier to canalize, to channel our attention and to understand how the other person is functioning, but groups can be quite disturbing. And secondly, most of the people who have this, I certainly had this when I was a child, is a feeling that we have a lack of personal recognition. And that means that we feel that people don't really understand who we are, they don't recognize who we are, they don't see the unique being that we are or the interest of who we are, and that hurts. And all of that creates misunderstanding and confusion, the problem of masking, so you never really show your true self because you're afraid of being rejected and because you're trying to understand what other people are expecting from you, but it doesn't really make sense. So there is this mismatch between your true self and what you show to people, and a lot of anxiety, especially about relationships. So how to make friends, how to convince, how to do an interview, or how to have intimate relationship. All of that can create a lot of anxiety for people who have this wall of glass. Something that I've also noticed over the years is that people who have this wall of glass are very, they have this problem of being easier to manipulate, to be manipulated, or taking advantage of, because they don't always recognize that somebody else has negative intentions. It's harder to screen for people's intentions. And of course, unhappy relationship is very, very common. It's almost a definition of this problem. And also, because life is about dealing with other people and socializing, if you have difficulties in this area, that means less opportunities in life, less safety, less connection, and so on and so on. So it's a big problem. So if your child is going through this, it would be too bad to have him continue to feel this way, to feel rejected or like an outcast or not understanding what's wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them really, but there is just this disconnection with the outside world, and that can create a lot of suffering. Now, living with this wall of glass also have consequences that can be seen as positive. The first one is that you are in your bubble, so to speak, and in your bubble you feel good. And this is your comfort zone, the zone where you understand what's going on, and generally you feel good about that. And the problem is that you live in your head and you are intellectually successful. I see a lot of people who are really successful in their career and their work as long as they don't have to deal with people. So that's great, but there is always something missing. And if you have that, you will always struggle with relationships and intimacy because you lack this intuitive, direct, emotional connection to other people. So you probably wonder, okay, that makes sense, but how do you find if you have this wall of glass? How do you test for it? Well, generally when you have it, you somehow know, you understand from the description that, oh yes, this is what I'm going through. But there is also a very simple test that you can do with somebody else if you want to try it for yourself, or if you want to do it with your child. I'm going to show you how to do it. Let's do it. Okay, so how do you find if you have this experience I call the wall of glass? Well, you're going to need somebody else to help you with it. So imagine that you want to try if you have the wall of glass yourself. What you will do is you will ask somebody to put a hand like this in front of you, a little bit away from you, like 1 meter away, and to approach you with this hand like this slowly, until that person can touch you with the hand. What will happen if you have this wall of glass is that you will see the hand at first, but you won't feel the presence of the hand. It's only a visual experience of, yes, I see a hand, I know the hand is there, but I don't really feel it's in my space. And then as the hand is moving closer, at some point it will pass a line, a barrier, where you suddenly, oh, now I see the hand, but I also feel the hand, I feel this presence, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable or disturbing, or it can be slightly uncomfortable. It's not like a big deal, but it's like, okay, yes, now I see the hand, but I don't feel it, and here I see it, I see it, I see it, oh, I feel it here now, and I feel that it's in my space. For most people, there is a left-right difference between the distance between their body and this wall of glass experience. For some people, it's very far away, like this far away from their body, but for most people, it's pretty close. It's like 5-10 centimeters. And for some people, it's really, really close, and they don't really feel anything that's outside the space. And that's why sometimes they don't really like when people touch them, because suddenly it feels like an intrusion in their space. But they might like hugs, because with hugs you have your whole body is contained. It feels good. But with somebody touching you, that feels, oh, something is happening in my space and I don't control it and I don't like it. So it depends, the effect depends on how far is this barrier from your body. For most people, it's somewhere around there. And you can feel what's inside, but what's outside you can see, but you cannot feel. So it's a way to test for it. And if you try it several times, you might notice if you're actually doing it on somebody else, if you're, for example, testing on your children, and you're moving your hands towards them, you might notice that at some point they have a reaction. They're like, oh yes, something there. And that helps you to feel where is this limit, this barrier. So that's how you test for this wall of glass. And you can try it on both sides of the body. The left side and the right side can be a little bit different, so that's always interesting to notice. And you can also notice in yourself if you have a feeling of space that is different on your right side and on your left side. Because very often there is a slight difference between the two. But sometimes it's really strong and it's really close to the body, so you don't really feel anything, but you just notice that when somebody is entering your personal space, it doesn't feel very comfortable. So try it and let me know what you find. Okay, so now with this simple test, you can see if you have this wall of glass, this invisible barrier. Sometimes it's not always easy to be conclusive, but we can always talk about it. However, that gives you an idea. So now that you recognize that this wall of glass is there in your child or in yourself, and you understand all the consequences that it has, logically you understand also that eliminating this wall of glass might be one of the biggest improvements in your quality of life. So you probably wonder, where does this wall of glass come from? Why is it there? What is it? Well, there's a lot to say about it very, very shortly. This wall of glass is a consequence of something specific that happens in our biological development. This is something that happens before we are born. There's a moment where this wall of glass appears. And it appears because of epigenetic damages. And those epigenetic damages are some molecular problems that disrupt gene expression. That means that your genes are not allowed to be expressed how they should be, and as a result you have this wall of glass. Now this is quite complex to explain in detail, so I will do that in another video, but basically this is where it's coming from. Now the good news is that we can change it. We can remove this wall of glass, and it has tremendous positive effects. So let me introduce to you what I do and what other colleagues of mine are doing with this process. So the removing the wall of glass process, it's a handy name, it's an epigenetic procedure that completely eliminates the source of the issue in all of its symptoms for life. That means that once you have done the process and it's complete, you feel that this wall of glass is disappearing and it's gone forever. Personally, I did it 7 years ago, so I can tell you for 7 years it's stable, it's for life. And the process consists of several sessions with a highly skilled therapist who will guide you through the process. And it generally takes 7 to 10 hours to complete. And what we want to do is to eliminate the problem at the cellular level. And that means that the techniques that we're going to use are kind of body-mind techniques that work on the cellular levels, are very simple to use, and we're not going to work on the level of the brain. So we're not going to train you or to persuade you or to do any kind of intellectual work or neurological work. That's not where it's at. We're going to eliminate the problem at the cellular level, and that has a much more profound effect. So during the treatment, what we do is we will regress you or your child, if you can, to the first moment when this wall of glass appears. And those epigenetic damages will show up as emotions and sensations such as fear or sadness or feeling trapped and so on. And we will guide you on how to do a gentle therapy techniques that will eliminate those emotional struggles until you feel like things are changing and you feel like this wall of glass is less and less and less until it disappears completely. And that's really wonderful to experience, actually. Because at the end you feel that this wall of glass is lifting up, it's gone forever, and you start making connection with people that are much more profound, much more heartfelt, and that feels great, that feels wonderful. It feels like somehow you have an access to life that is much better and much more joyful and satisfying as before. And that's great. It's really a nice thing to witness. And it has a lot of advantages. So you instantly feel a change of your emotional connection with people. So sometimes people describe me, oh, it feels like my heart was trying to work but not being able to, and now it starts working. I start feeling those connections with people. and there is this understanding that happens, and it's nice. And if you are a high functional or high intellectual potential person, you or your children, well, your smartness and uniqueness is not going anywhere, okay? You remain unique in your way of thinking, your way of being, but you just gain an access to the world and a release of anxiety and this disconnection problem. So it only has positive effects, really. And your relational intelligence increase rapidly. There is a sense of satisfaction, and relationships become easier and more fulfilling. It's only positive. And removing the wall of glass feels like you are coming out of jail. And this invisible prison is lifted and it disappears forever. And again, this is a wonderful thing to witness when I'm guiding people through it. It's always, wow, now I feel the world around me. Oh, people, I feel people differently. And I feel so much better. And that's such a wonderful thing to see. And most importantly, you finally figure out what's going on in life, and you feel that life is not happening outside of you, but you are part of something that is shared, a shared life, if I can put it that way. So to conclude, aren't relationships the most fulfilling area of our lives? Normally it should be. But for people who have this wall of glass, this is kind of taken away from them. They can more or less get it, but it's not just at the same level that people who don't have this wall of glass. And here we're talking about very important elements of human life. So love and romance, friendship, feelings that you belong to a community, that you have people that you can count on, and that they can count on you, and you have these shared feelings. Of course, family life and social integration, being able to work with other people, create projects, create associations, and feeling that you are part of something that is bigger than yourself. And all of these relationships can bring us the most important joys and happiness in our lives. But if we are stuck in this wall of glass, generally we prefer to live in our bubble, and we don't experience the same level of happiness and satisfaction in relationships. So generally we just end up thinking, oh, this is the way it is, and it's the fault of other people, they don't accept me, they reject me. But whatever the conclusions we make about it, the fact are we feel that we don't have access to something that other people seem to have naturally. And that's really too bad. It doesn't have to be this way, because now we can change it and we can give your children or yourself access to it. So we have this process and it works. And it works so well that we actually have a guarantee of results. When we work with somebody and we know that we can help them, we will tell you, if we have this conversation, if you have this wall of glass, we will tell you, yes, we can remove it and we guarantee the results. And that means that there is no fee if the treatment doesn't work in eliminating your issue. And we do this because we are very confident in our process and we want to protect you. And this process is safe. There is no major safety risk or any negative side effect. The only thing that can quite be a little bit challenging at the end of the process is to feel a little bit vulnerable, because now you have access to people and you feel that people kind of have access to you also. But this feeling generally is resolved pretty easily, and at the end you just feel peaceful and happy about it. So we're here to guide you through it and make sure that it's easy to do, joyful, pleasant, and positive on all aspects. And we can guarantee the results. So who is this for? Well, this is for you or your child. If you or your child feels separated or different and suffer from these unsatisfying relationships, it doesn't really matter to me and my colleagues if you have been formally diagnosed with high-functioning autism or Asperger's syndrome. What's really important is that you would recognize the symptoms we describe, so the symptoms of this wall of glass. And this is for you if you are ready to invest financially in increasing your quality of life or your children's quality of life, and you are ready to follow simple instructions for several sessions, And we work with children as young as 10-year-old. A 10-year-old can do the process. It's easy to follow. You just have to be willing to do several sessions, but anyone can do it really. It's really simple to do. And you need to be ready to take action now, because there's going to be a level of commitment and efforts to do. It's easy to follow, but you have several hours of work to do. So you need to be ready to do this and do this to the end. And you also need to be you also need to be open about possibilities, because probably you've been experiencing this for a long time and experiencing that this is how it is, it will never change, and I need to accept it and to adapt to it. And it's good to accept it. It's always the first step, is to accept what is. But at the same time, there are possibilities and they can be expanded and opened. And that's what we're going to do together when we have this conversation. Is probably I will open your possibilities, and from this video you probably already seen the expanded possibilities. You need to be open to experience that yourself or your children. So this decision could change your life forever. So if you want to know more, if you want to know if this applies to you or your children, well, you should contact us here below this video. And there is a link to book a meeting with one of our staff. So it will be me or one of my colleagues from the Institute. And we will discuss your situation and tell you right away if we can help you or not. Because we don't want to work with people that we won't be able to help in the end. That doesn't make any sense. It would be a waste of time. So we will have this conversation to see if this process would be a good fit for you. And if it is, then we will start working together and start making changes and changing your life for the better. That's what we hope for. So if you have any question, please fill the survey. There is a short survey to complete before you book the meeting on our calendar. If you have any question, feel free to ask them here. And I'm looking forward to answering them and to be getting to know you and to see if we can help you for the better. Thank you and have a nice day.